everyone. Good morning. Good morning. For today's the special talk about the academic writing. So may I introduce Professor Rob Marchant. He's the professor of the tropical ecology from the Department of Environment and Geography, the University of York. Professor Rob, he is the advisor of our PhD committee as well, and he's going to be one of our member as the adjunct professor. Therefore, welcome you to the faculty again. And Professor Rob has a lot of experience in writing the proposal, submitting the research application, and successful application as well, and a lot of publications. Maybe he produced 20 publications per year, something like that. Therefore, our program, the PhD program, is very happy to have you here and share your experience, share your tips for the academic writing, and also please make the most of it. So exploit this opportunity, and we hope that you enjoy.
So I think this works. And well, first of all, thank you very much, Pan. It's lovely to be back in Madrid. I always appreciate the times that we have together, and I really value the collaboration. We've got a few people online. I think the online numbers will increase a little bit as we go. And what I really wanted to do is just spend a couple of hours with you talking a little bit about the process of writing, how to maximize your sort of potential, and particularly think about how we tell stories, how we create our perspectives on writing. I've actually really enjoyed putting the presentation together. I will share all the slides with you. So again, you know, these are made available to everybody through PUN. And I've really enjoyed putting the presentation together, largely because, you know, as a writer, as PUN mentioned, somebody who writes a lot. I think in total, with maybe, I don't know, 350 or so papers in different, over my career, a book, another one in progress. Often I will just write, and I don't really think about the process, where it's been really useful for myself to actually think about decisions that I make in the process of writing, think how we approach writing, how we tell stories. And we all will have heard stories. We would have been, I'm sure, captivated as small girls and boys by stories that our parents would have told us, or our grandparents, or maybe an influential teacher at school, and how they were able to communicate a story. And those stories have stayed with us. You're all doing work, and we'll know a little bit about your work, and we'll get to know each other as we go through the session a little bit. And we all have pros and cons. We all have skills. We all have things that, you know, traits that are particularly good. Others where we feel as though, you know, we could improve. And we have to understand ourselves. We have to understand our strengths. We have to understand our capabilities, understand how we work. We're all very different individuals, and we all work in an individual way. It's not that one way is better than another. They're just different. And it's really important that you know yourself, you understand what works best, what environment is good for you. Some people love that pressure and working to strong deadlines. Some people like to work in a busy environment and can work on trains or MTR doing the things. Other people need calm and serenity and to be in a quiet place to do that writing. So again, think about your own character. Think about the types of things that support you in your writing, that support you in your storytelling. And don't try, I know it's often difficult, but where possible, build on those strengths. Don't try to write in a busy environment if you hate all of the noise and the clutter around you. Many people are parts of teams. I know I'll introduce myself a little bit more and understand a little bit more about yourselves. Many people are doing PhDs or master's projects or are interested in communicating the work that they're doing. Some people are working individually. Others are part of a big research group or part of a research team, a cog in the machine. Individually, your own project, and you have the responsibility for your own work. Or if you're part of a large lab group and you're doing one experiment as part of this wider whole. Again, they're very different constructs. So again, just appreciate your role as part of a team or as an individual. But again, for those of you that are working very much as an individual, you don't need to feel that you're alone in the process. You have the first port of call, of course, is a supervisory team. Working with your supervisors is really important. I know from my own experience as a PhD student, sometimes there's a disconnect with your supervisors. That happens. But again, you shouldn't feel as though that means you're then alone. There are other people that you can turn to. There's always somebody you can discuss your work with, even if it's just your peers. Also really important. As I say, I've really enjoyed putting this sort of presentation together because it's allowed me to step back a little bit from the actual process of writing and think about the actual process itself. Process of writing, the outcome, the paper, the manuscript, the thesis, whatever you're wanting to write will come as a result of the process. Yeah. Okay, so before I start, I just wanted to find out a little bit more about the people in the room and the people online, just so I know a little bit about what you're doing. So maybe if we could just introduce ourselves in terms of who we are, what we're doing, and at what stage of our work we're at. So as mentioned, I'm Rob Marchant. I'm based at the University of York in UK. I've had a long-term relationship with Madison University, Professor Peng Wang. Ramita Pan was a former PhD researcher working with me many years ago. And over the 15 or so years, we've developed a really nice collaboration which continues. There's sort of generations of people that we've worked with. I, like many people, have changed focus a little bit over my career. I very much started off as a paleoecologist, understanding long-term histories, understanding environmental change. I still do lots of paleoecology, but increasingly, rather than looking down into the ground and into sediments and going back through time, we create models and we try to understand the future. But so those, for me, it's the connections between the past, the present, and the future, and how we can use land, particularly understanding of land use, relationships between people and land, to get ahead of the challenges that we're facing, be they challenges around climate change, around biodiversity conservation, around environmental protection, around water quality, whatever it may be. Land is a really important denominator. And to coin a phrase from this university, that wisdom of the land, crest of a wave. I'm sort of a little bit behind it now, I think, but certainly as PhD researchers, master's researchers, people that very much in that early career stage, you're really at that forefront of your knowledge. You are really creating that new boundaries, and it's really through the interaction with my sort of PhD colleagues and other colleagues that I somehow cling on to that crest, and understand a little bit about a very daunting process. So where do we start? How do we go about creating that story? Where do we think about submitting that? And these are all issues that I'm gonna talk about in the next couple of hours. I've divided the presentation into two parts. So first of all, it's a sort of 10-part plan about how the abstract, the introduction, working their way sequentially through a paper. I think the first thing that we need to think about is what story we want to tell and who we want to tell that to. And part of that who is partly dependent on what you want to do as an individual. Many of us, I guess, are, based currently within the university, most likely wanting to go into a university career. Not all of us. And for those of us that would like to go into the university, yes, academic writing, that's one of our currencies, probably one of the main currencies as academics is our research output. The other ones being things like research grants or numbers of students that graduate through your supervision, the teaching that you deliver. But one of the key currencies of academia is still that publication output. And how we can share that knowledge that we have from the crest of the wave to the wider public. And I say it can be very daunting in the same way that I've been daunted over the last few days with lots of beautiful and expansive meals. Where do you start? How do you chip away? And I think it's about dissecting the process. Because it can be overwhelming when you think, oh, I've got to write this paper and I don't know, I've got so much that I want to try and convey, so much information. I've been working for years and years on my project, and invariably most of us will do too much research. We always will run too many experiments, we have too many interviews, we have too many focal discussion groups, we've collected too much information. And because we've invested time in collecting that information, we're very precious. We don't want to just get rid of it. So we try to regurgitate it all at a single time. So try to break things down, just segment things. So as I say, I'm going to develop the presentation is in two parts. The first of all is just thinking about the process, to work with anthropologists. So again, you know, different storylines focus, and also different disciplines into the actual writing process. So, for example, in the social sciences, it's often really important to have those sort of single authored contributions. Yeah. Where it doesn't really matter within the natural or the ecological scientists, you can be part of a team. You know, often, you know, by default, as a researcher, as the person with the knowledge at the end, at the crest of the wave, you know, you will lead the publication. You will be first on the paper. But often, in the being paper with 20 co-authors, doesn't carry anywhere near as much weight as that single authored paper. So again, we have to appreciate those differences between the different disciplines. But regardless if it's social or natural or real hardcore physical science, you know, it's a structured process. There's a logical flow, there's a clarity, there's a coherence to the process. And I say in the second half of the presentation, then we'll look at those different components. It's very much going through a typical paper. What's in an abstract? What's in an introduction? What should you include in the methods? And I say there is this caveat of my own positionality, but I fortunately have, you know, somewhat have had 30 years in university life. I have had chance to work with lots of different groups, so I do have that interdisciplinary experience. So first things first, choosing a journal. How do we choose where to submit it? You know, of course, we would all like to have the highest impact paper possible, and we'd always go straight to, you know, sort of Nature's or Science or wherever we would like to put our work. But that's not always the most appropriate place. And clearly there are lots of there's lots of challenges, and we'll talk about rejection and how to deal with rejection. You know, some of these journals, particularly places like Nature, you know, they'll accept 1% of papers submitted. So 99% of all papers into these journals are going to be rejected, often before it even gets to the review process. You know, and that happens to all of us. I mean, I had one 2 days ago from Global Change Biology. Again, they probably reject 80% of papers that go into the editor. So it's actually, you know, we had a nice paper, and we did think, you know, this paper's quite good. You've got some nice, interesting ideas, some nice management implications. Let's try. And the good thing often about rejection is quick. Literally within 3 days, we'd written the letter, we'd submitted the thing. 3 days later, we've been rejected, so we go to plan B. And we'll talk about that process later on. But certainly thinking about your audience and who you would like to listen to your story is important. Much of my work is based on different parts of the African continent. My PhD was in Uganda, and I've continued over the last 30 years to work in different parts of the African continent. Maybe some of our more impactful work, some of the work that's had most impact has not been in nature and science, and I've got papers in nature and science. We had one out a couple of weeks ago in Nature Climate Change. We've got another one coming out in Nature Climate Change. But probably one impactful articles is in the African Journal of Ecology. It's not a great impact score, but in terms of capturing and targeting the readership that I'm interested in connecting to, those specific regionally accessible journals that would connect into the community that I want to connect into, for me, are personally very important. And again, positionality is important here. I know I'm in a very luxurious now, come to the sort of end of career, or at least that sort of the last part of the relay race. But I'm not looking for emotions. I'm not looking for additional, those initiations. So I am in that very luxury where I don't have to publish in those highest impact journals. So me. Again, that's important when your individual or where you would like to publish. At any occasion, at any point, or you want to ask questions, feel free. We're a small group also online, so feel free to hand up or just shout out. So planning is really important. Think about the relevance. Clearly, as researchers, we do lots of reading, probably a lot more reading than writing. And you'll know the journals that you're reading that will inform your research. So often that's quite a good starting place in terms of where you would like to publish. And that tells you a little bit about your target audience in the sense or for somebody else's work, in that you're reading their work, you're appreciating their work. That will tell you a little about your work. And to academia, are you interested in work to academics, other scholars? Is it more that of planning and policy, or system management, or evidence for based evidence makers, or the public? Again, we'll come to the broader public later. In terms of what happens when you've got that paper published, how you can develop policy briefs, how you can develop more accessible articles around it, do your press releases, all of those things to really maximize the potential of that paper as it comes out. I know sometimes people are very much driven by impact factor and reputation of the journal. And I know, we have various universities have their preferred lists, and there's sort of Q1, Q2, Q3 journals. And I say, again, I'm in that sort of position now where I don't necessarily have to be driven by those lists. Other people are, and it's really important to them. You know, one of my recent PhD graduates, Chinese scholar, he's still based in the UK, but looking to go back to a Chinese university, get an academic position. For him, it's really important to have those, you know, there's a whole list of journals in the Q1 type range, and it's important for him to have his papers in those journals. And that's often a deciding factor for him in terms of the publications. But most of all, it's important to consider that fit. Is the journal the right place for your work? Even if the impact factor isn't the highest, it might be a better place for you to have your work published. I would say, you know, on reflection, having a paper that gets lots of citations, is well received, will be more beneficial to you than a really high impact factor paper that has 10 or 20 or 30 citations. And again, it's difficult to know sort of how that paper will be received until it, you know, until there's a little bit of history behind it. As I mentioned, although PhDs, research can often be a bit of a lonely place, you're not alone. You've got lots of peers, mentors, supervisors, colleagues, friends who can help you in that process of deciding where to submit your paper. And I say, think about the work that you've enjoyed reading. You know, often journals will have a sort of house style. They'll present things in a certain way. They will have, you know, for example, some journals have free color, others don't. If you want to have lots of nice photographs in your paper, you know, choose one that will support that. Again, you know, these are really important visual ways of presenting it. Clearly, open access is an issue. You know, having accessibility, great accessibility to your work is important. This is something very. I was reading this morning on some of my emails about decisions in my own institution about you know, reduced budgets for open access. We've got to save some money across our institution, and you know, the millions of pounds that the university spends on journal subscriptions to have open access is one area where save a little bit of money. And often those subscription-based journals will restrict access to their articles, or you can pay an additional fee. So we had a paper a couple of years ago in Nature, $6,000 to pay for it to go open access. But clearly it's worth it, because there's nothing worse than, and again, you know, we look at all different ways of making sure that work is accessible, even just by PDFs on our websites and things like that. Nothing worse. All of that, your crest of the wave, finally published, and then people can't act because it's behind some paywall or whatever. So again, it's up to you, researcher, to make sure that your work is that you target that you want. As I say, acceptance rates and the review process. You know, you've got your submitted it, and you know, there's a whole range of different acceptance rates. Certainly, some of the subscribe to journals, you know, can be really punitive, 1%, even less than 1%, probably for Nature. which is a concern, but likewise, journals that will accept anything is also a big concern. You don't want to be in whatever it is, the Marleyan journal of soil science that will just take anything, and they don't have a readership, and you may have to pay your article processing charges to get into that. So they're a money-making initiative. So certainly you need to have a peer review process. It's really important. I mean, clearly you have your own communities around you that will give you that peer review. But and we'll talk a little bit about the review process in more detail later on. But I say rejection is a normal part of academic life. I know it's really hard because, again, we've got that personal investment in our work. We think it's brilliant. We think we're at that. We've got some really good discoveries. We've got some really important stories to tell the world. But rejection is normal. Let's say, fortunately, say we've published maybe about 350 or so papers. So, papers do come through. But we've also had some really good papers. Some of our best papers, I feel, haven't made it through. So don't give up. It really is important to view that process of submission, rejection, trying again as a normal part of the academic process. And ultimately that helps to improve your work, I think. I know some of our grants and, similar sort of thing. We'll apply for grants, that comes back, it's rejected. But we then build on the reviewer's comments. We think, okay, this can be better. Yes, I can see there's a problem here, there, or whatever. We can fix it. We can increase the resolution. We can increase our sample size. We can go and have some more focal group discussions. Again, there's a whole time process involved in publication that can be frustrating. Doing PhDs and you've got your 3.5 years or 3 registration. It takes you maybe the first year to really understand a little bit about what you're doing, another year or so to generate the data, and then you start sending it out to your journals. And sometimes they can be waiting, and you're in that review process for months. And then eventually, after 6 months, it comes back rejected. Very frustrating. But often it's not the case where it comes back after 6 months and is rejected. And say major review or do this, do that, do this. But there is public timeline. Not when you go on to look at appropriate journals, there's lots of information on their home pages about the process, about the normal time it takes, about how they conduct the review process, about the editors. So often a journal, say for example, Global Change Biology, where I say we just had this paper rejected. We also had a paper published there about 2 weeks ago. But you can go on to the Global Change Biology. There's about 20 editors that work for that Global Change Biology. You can see which one that you're most likely to have your manuscript sent. So when you submit your manuscript to a journal, it will get assigned to one of the 20 or so editors. They will be the person to handle your work. Either she will be a disciplinary expert in your area. They will assign it to reviewers. They will then liaise between the reviewers and yourself. But I say there's information on something about submission. pretty much every journal has its own individual style. Say we're competing academics or working to journals are competing themselves to better into inscription, increase quality of the work being published. A lot of journal to improve their publication. Talked a little bit already about the fee. Most, in the process, you will invariably charges at some point for access for the article process, charges the APC. They're called. Information is transparent on what's going to be in your paper, and then when the journal will then say, "Congratulations, pay accepted. Please pay $2.50." You think you don't have $2,000 to pay for. My grant's finished. And in fact, we had one of the master students who got a lovely, just at the end of this month, next week. He had to go through his and me going to university to need to cover the cost that she had been. We were able to do that, but that's not always the most grant or your if they're aware of them. So again, the supervisor, I'm going to share this journal $1,000. That's fine. We've got our grant, UKRR, EU, or Science Foundation for articles. No article being published in that journal, so again, that's often a good indication of if it's an appropriate place. Unfortunately, the top of it's missing a little bit, but I say the personal considerations, I mentioned this earlier on, depend on what you want. If you want to be, the most cited professor in Thai universities, yes, you're going to need those high quality publications in Nature and Science or whichever is the best academic disciplinary journal for yourself. If you want to go and work in an NGO sector or go and work in a more practice environment, they're not so important. If you want to leave academia and go and work in whatever it is, family business or whatever it is, again, that's not going to help you in your career having all of these wonderful journal articles if you're not in that academic circle. So again, those personal considerations are really important in terms of driving where you submit your work. So the last of the 10 points, think a little bit about, there's lots of tools online to help you think about the journals that you would like to publish in. I say we do lots of reading as researchers. We probably could all list 5 or 10 journals that we read quite regularly. For myself, be things like, yes, Science and Nature, but then things like the Holocene, Paleoecology, Global Change Biology, Journal of the Total Environment, and so those journals are often places where we would like to publish. But there are tools. all of the big publishing houses like Elsevier and Wiley or Cambridge University Press will have journal finders. There's lots of information on pages about scope, publish interdisciplinary in X, Y, and Z. We only look to publish, new methods in, etc. And often I say, check in the references of places that has informed your work. As a journal editor myself, as somebody who's worked for journals, when I'm looking for reviewers for a submitted manuscript, one of the first things I'll do is go to the references in the submitted article and look for, somebody who's cited. If there's somebody cited 3 or 4 times, they could be an appropriate person to review the submitted work. But when you're trying to find suitable journals, and again, I know there is this sort of to have publications, to wish to disseminate your work, do try to these sort of predatory journals. Yeah. And we all have those unsolicited mails, please submit your paper to this journal or this special issue coming out. So be very aware, but also sometimes think are appropriate places. If there's a special issue of a journal and that special issue is in an area that really resonates with your work, that might be a good place, because straight away that you're going to be part of a collection. People who are working in that area will go to that special issue and think, okay, I've got 15 papers around my topic, and yours is one of those 15. Get that in. So that's a little bit of a point thinking about how you choose the journal that you would like to submit to, about the factors which are important to you as an individual, bearing in mind your personal considerations, bearing in mind what you want to of your work, who you want to read your work, the time frames, some of the challenges around it. And I think that is the end of the first sort of part. So I'll just take a little bit of a breath here, just for 5 minutes or so. Happy to take any questions if there's any points that particularly resonated in that sort of 10-point guide that you would like to explore further, or if you have any points of clarification you want. Now's a good time to think about it. And then I'll have a sip of my iced water or iced milky water, and then come back for the second part, where we'll go through this sort of the different components of a paper. Okay.
Any questions from the floor before we have a few minutes break? Not yet? Okay. Any questions from online? Okay, so we have the break outside. Have the แป๊บนึงพี่อ๋อ is preparing. You can have coffee outside and the break meal comes and you can have it inside along. Yes, because Ajahn Lok will have to go in at 12, at 11.
So maybe you have to get a version of the actually sometimes it's not frustrated that being super tired. Even in subversion, but it's not because society is useful and sometimes struggle because you're thinking about pictures so and as a teacher and so what don't talk about picture we all very much on that. So
He's the most important. Yes,
yeah, really my content.
อะไรนะสูตรยาในการขึ้นกับของมาคราวนี้อ่ะเป็นแล้วแต่ก็ไม่ได้การว่าคนของเราไปก็เป็นประเด็นที่คนช่วยเราก็
เรื่องนี้มันไปได้เลยกำลังคิดว่าจะส่งเกมเข้ามาคุยกันส่งแล้วอาจารย์ชื่ออะไรยุนใช่ไหมอ๋อเขาเรียกยุนคุณยุนการซึ่งมันเป็นตัวคะแนนเป็นต่างจากบ้านใช่มันคือตอนนี้อาจารย์เราคิดว่าการเป็นการคือการไม่ทำของเราจะไม่ได้ต้องแยกส่วนกันส่วนข้างบนการเป็นเยอะมันคือสิ่งที่แล้วตอนนี้สูงไปมันไม่ได้ใช้หมดเองหรอกก็เลยตอนนี้แต่สูตรกลางมันคิดว่ามันไม่ควรใช้มันก็เราทำใหม่ใช้ผิดทางเรียนในเบื้องต้นนี่เรียกว่าคอยใช้เราเป็นการนะแต่ว่าเป็นยังว่ามันเป็นแต่อันนี้เป็นคนที่แต่ไม่ใช่ใช่เราเป็นโรคอะไรเปลี่ยนเป็นใช่ก็ว่าแบบว่ายังไงก็มีสมการการอันเดอร์เดลิสเป็นบทสองที่ก็ปรับได้อาจจะได้เป็นซิตี้อ่ะชมเป็นทุกอย่างมากปฏิทินให้เลขกี่แต่กี่ที่ของกันมันก็มีแบบนี้มันมองได้ใช้กับที่แล้วถ้าไหนที่มีต้องเซ็ตท่ากลางไหมอาจารย์แต่มันเป็นสัญญาณดีไม่ได้แล้วใครไม่ได้แบบเราดูต่อเสียน้องแล้วก็พี่มันกลับตรงนี้แล้วเหรอคะก็เลยพี่แม่พามาได้ไม่ได้เดินคนยุ่งกันนี้พี่วุฒิเอามาหรือยังเอาอีกไหม เด็กพี่ว่ากินหนอกยาเอาให้ดูเลยนะหนักมีของถ้ามีข้าวสุดเป็นรสชาติสุดไปเลยแล้วแกต้องทำคืออะไรที่เราไม่ไม่ได้ที่เป็นนี้นะจะมีข้อจากกันเป็นข้อไปแล้วเรื่องให้อยู่ที่เราไม่อยู่ที่ใครที่เราไม่ได้พวกนี้แต่นี่ทำงานเจอกันไม่ได้หรอกสัญญาเสร็จแล้วได้ไปเปิดทางเปิดไว้ข้างอ๋อโอเคมีอาการเมื่อหลังทำได้พี่อ้อมีกระโดดไหมมีกระโดดไหม
Online people, you missed the break from Bellany พลาดขนมเบรกนะคะออนไลน์พลาดขนมเบรก
I really want to have it.
What?
Good morning, ค่ะอาจารย์
Good morning. You missed the break.
Yeah, I really missed it. I miss
Okay.
Okay, so just a last minute warning, and then we'll resume. For those of you online, you may have had missed out a very nice pineapple pastry or chicken pastry, I think. Yeah, chicken or pineapple. two different types, and a nice coffee. So yeah, I'll just wait for the last people to come in, and then we'll start again in the second part. As mentioned to people in the room, originally we'd scheduled 3 hours for the session. Unfortunately, because some of the other colleagues I need to meet while I'm here have other arrangements, so I've had to shift it a little bit earlier. So I have to run until 11 o'clock, and then I have to unceremoniously go off for some other meetings. But I'm around, and I'm very welcome to keep the conversation going. So you know, as I mentioned, the slides will remain with Dun, and then I don't know if you'll disseminate them in some way, or if there's some share place that you can put the slides. My contact details are on the first slide. Yeah, so again, feel free to reach out if you want additional information. As I said earlier on, one of the things that I think it's very much in our responsibility as researchers, with all of this knowledge and all of this time that we've invested, and the resources that funders have invested in us, the resources that institutions have invested in us, that we share our knowledge. And I say we maintain a research group website, and we make sure that all of our publications, all of our data sets, all of the information that we can share is there and readily available for people to access. Good. So as mentioned, now into the second part, but we'll really just go into that sort of a typical structure for a paper, and think again about the different component parts. And again, as I mentioned right at the beginning, this process of producing a manuscript, you know, even if it's only 3,000 words, 6,000 words, it's a relatively small amount of writing, but it can be very daunting. So just think about breaking things down, think about revisiting stuff. Clearly, having a title can be a good start. And it's not that, although I'm going to present it sequentially as we go through a paper, it doesn't mean that you have to do it in this order. Often the title will be revised right at the end. As I mentioned about a paper that we had a couple of days ago, rejected from Global Change Biology. The title of the paper got revised slightly, almost two days before we submitted it. Just thinking to reflect some of the things that we wanted to reflect and to emphasize more. But certainly start off by, what do you want us to convey? What's the story that you want to tell? And ultimately, this will go through quite a lot of iteration, but it should be concise, it should be descriptive, it should be interesting, it should be captivating. When your journal, when your manuscript arrives at a journal, the first thing they're going to see is the title of the manuscript. So that's your sort of, elevator moment, as it were. That's the point where you can attract the attention of the editor. And you don't necessarily do that by saying, first exposure of this, new finding of this. the world's best, you know, that's not the way to do it. But it should really captivate the editor, whoever she or he may be, with wanting to know more. Again, you know, now move on to the abstract. Often I find it's the last thing to write in the paper, but here it's number 2. It's not, and I emphasize again, it's not a sequential list of things that you go through. And effectively, an abstract should have 4 components. You know, why is it important? What's the context? Yeah, and often these are, it's 200 to 300 words, often, sometimes less. So you invariably have a sentence for, you know, what's the context? What's the purpose? What's the focus of the work? What you did and how you did it, your recipe. You know, we interviewed X numbers of respondents from X communities across the particular system. You know, we conducted this experiment, we collected these materials, and we did radiocarbon analysis, or, you know, whatever you did, your methods. What are the key findings? And what are the implications of your work? So that goes full circle. It goes back to why is it important? You know, what the context is. And the abstract should be understandable on its own, so you don't need to refer to, you know, figure 3 or read more in your discussions or your conclusion to know more about it. And I say you can often use it as a map for the paper, and often gets revised at the end. So sometimes you might even start off by just having a series of bullet points, one for each of those why, what. And then think about your keywords. One of the key things here when you're thinking about your keywords is it should, again, capture the essence of the paper, but those keywords don't duplicate what you see in the title particularly. And invariably when you do your Google Scholar search for, you know, whatever you're interested in, or your Web of Science search, or whatever the search engine you're using, is it will scan title and keywords. If you've got the same words in your keywords and your title, then you've missed an opportunity for your work to be captured. Unfortunately, I maybe should have included actually a chart showing numbers of publications over the years. And, you know, as we know now, there's so much information out there. There's so many articles written. There's so much, so many publishing houses producing work. So certainly, you know, the growth of material out there for us to read is growing. It's growing, you know, fairly rapid rate. I don't know about exponential, but certainly there's an upward curve in terms of information out there. And again, you've got to make your work stand out in this increasingly busy sphere. So again, using keywords and title words carefully is a really important thing to consider. And I emphasize again, the whole process of writing is iterative. It's not doing the title, then doing the abstract, then doing the introduction, then doing the methods. You can come back and forth, and ultimately, you know, you'll revisit all of this towards the end before you submit. Again, before we go into the introduction, actually, just on that last slide, in terms of getting your work into review, title is really important, grabbing the attention of whoever's desk it lands on. And then the abstract. You know, those are the 2 things that invariably somebody would read. I know when I read a paper, I will title, certainly, oh, that's interesting, I'll know more about that. Abstract, oh, that's interesting, I'd like to know more. And then invariably, I would then go to the conclusions, miss out all the methods in the introduction and think of it, and then sort of almost work backwards. But again, that's just myself. As I mentioned, we all read things differently. We all work in different ways. Some people certainly would just have to read from the beginning to the end, where I just sort of jump around and just pick quickly, free and scan. I'll just scan, probably takes me maybe a couple of minutes to read an article or something like that. Clearly, I've not read it in great depth, and I haven't understood all of the nuances and all of the caveats that are there with the work. But again, I do tend to just sort of zoom in and zoom out of articles. But that's just my way of collecting information. So the introduction really it's that background, it's the context, it's that body of work that you contribute. I mentioned earlier on, I used this analogy of researchers as being on the crest of a wave, where your knowledge is right at the top of it. You could imagine the introduction as all of the body of the wave, all of that water below where you are. What the context is. What previous research has gone on. I know there's a number of us here that work on say carbon and in Thailand. There's lots of work being done around the world on issues around ecosystem. And again, it's about that wider context of your work. Yes, you might be working on a particular soil in a particular location, but that work contributes to a global understanding of processes. You might be working in a community in a particular location, but that is a case study that is situated within a whole series of other case studies. I know we were talking a little bit over coffee about contributions and where and it can often feel as though, can I really make this contribution into this global arena? And yes, you can. Either through, developing methods, developing new case studies from sites that we don't know about, it's all additional information. We also had a nice discussion around AI and how AI is complicating some of our world. But again, we have to view, AI is regurgitative. It's just taking information from what's there. That's the wave. It's not making new knowledge. It doesn't give you new insight. And there are all sorts of concerns with AI and ChatGPT and all of these different approaches, and particularly how increasingly they will shrink knowledge. And we're in institutions, and we're in a very fortunate place, I feel. Some people in universities, I know, view it as a threat, but I think we should be honest and open about it and think, well, actually, no, this is a real opportunity because we're creating new knowledge, we're creating new understanding, we're creating originality. That's the role of universities, of all of us as researchers. So, so introduction, it's the context, it's the background, it's the knowledge, it's what has led you to do your work. It's all of that reading that you've done. It's that positionality of your work, sometimes in terms of the theoretical underpinning of the work, particularly within the social sciences discipline, less so in the more sciencey side. Your situation, your positionality. all of those issues become important, particularly within the social sciences. But again, it's that context, so that the reader knows your context, your approach to a particular theory or a particular theoretical underpinning of the work. Again, that's a contribution, where you contribute into a particular methodology or a particular approach. Again, it can be a little bit overwhelming because there's so much information. You've done lots of reading. Invariably you're constrained by word limits. Pretty much every journal, every submission will have a word limit. Say for example, 6,000 words is quite a common word limit for many journals. You don't want to spend 6,000 words on your introduction and then find you then have to cut 3/4 of it to make room for your methods and your new findings. So again, think about that structure that I talked about earlier on. 6,000 words, so you probably would be thinking, depending on the discipline, depending on the journal, depending on how important the context is, but say 1,500 words, a quarter of the article should be around the introduction. Again, different people have different approaches. I mean, mine is around reading, writing, referencing, rereading, rewriting, and again, it's an iterative process of going around. Some people like to just read lots and take lots of notes and then just write. So again, know your own way of working and work with your own way of working. Ultimately, that introduction provides the state of the art. It outlines the knowledge gap. And again, it should be presented in a very clear way. I know, particularly in the social sciences, we often will think about dividing an introduction and a literature review. Quite often those things get combined within a manuscript into a single introduction section. Use breaks. Use headings. You can certainly use paragraphs to structure your work. Often a paper may have 3 or 4 introductory paragraphs. One could be around the methodology and about the methodological contribution. One could be around the sort of geographical context about where your study is based. One could be around current understanding in that particular discipline. And then ultimately this will lead to your aims of the paper, your hypotheses sometimes, particularly in a physical science submission, where you normally end up with your aims and objectives of your particular study. Okay. So once we have the context, we know where our work is positioned. We then come to the methods. Often I find, again, this is a personal thing, but I find the methods is a nice easy section, because literally you're just recounting your methodology. It's almost like writing a recipe for whatever it is, be it a cocktail or a particular favorite dish, or essentially what you did. And again, exactly what you did. So you're the person that knows the methods. What instrument you use. How you collected your samples, how you prepared your samples, how you designed your questionnaires, or how you set up your interviews, how you set up your focal groups, who was invited, what types of ethics clearance you needed, all of that process. And ultimately it should read as a recipe and allow somebody else to go and repeat your work. So at the end of the methods, it should allow somebody else to go to your study area, collect your sample, set up interviews in the same way, and probably come up with the same findings. So it's this sort of reproducibility of your work. Sometimes, again, depends on the journal. This can be not so much relegated, but it's not part of the paper. It's in the sort of supplementary information. So certainly nature articles, there's no methods in a nature article. It's in the further information. There is, I say, you've got 3,000 words to present the context, the main results, and the implications of that. The nuts and the bolts of what you did and how you did it is in the additional sort of supplementary information. And I say it is about creating a recipe. It's about almost giving directions, so that somebody who's reading your work can understand exactly what you did, how you did it, when you did it, where you did it, with who you did it, what process you went through. Yes, it's a bit more complicated than giving directions to a coffee shop or a restaurant or whatever. But ultimately, it should allow somebody to repeat what you did. So then we come to our results. This is your findings, your new knowledge. What your data tells you, what your story is. Again, this comes back to your title. Think about how you'd want to present your findings. I mentioned earlier on about pictures and about graphical representation. In the same way that many journals will restrict you to the numbers of words, they'll often restrict you to the numbers of figures that you have, the numbers of tables. Again, often say 6 is a commonly used number. So you've got 6 figures: a location figure, maybe 2 or 3 charts describing your results, and then some more analytical outputs. Again, try and design these things in a really straightforward and appropriate way. Again, coming back again and again to this idea of knowing yourself and knowing how you like to work. Often I find figures are a really good way to write a paper. Create a figure, your results. That figure can be then used to tell your story. Everything else can come around. A figure, I often think, is often a starting point for a good paper. Or a quote. It might be that you've been interviewing a community, and I say we've just a couple of weeks ago published a really nice paper around 10 mountain communities across equatorial Africa, from Ethiopia to Cameroon. 150 individuals living on mountains. How are you being impacted on by climate change, and how are you adapting? Some of the quotes that came from those interviews, and there was 1,500 or so, really led us to write the paper. They were the things that informed the paper. And yes, we were able to produce nice pie charts of different responses and how different communities are being impacted on differently, how they're adapting differently. But again, those figures just allowed us to write a really nice narrative describing the results. again, and I mentioned this earlier on in the introductory text, again, we're restricted to words. One of the real challenges that we have is, it's very just to write and write and write, but writing to a word limit, and a very strict word limit is often challenging. So again, this is where figures are really important, because there's a saying in the UK, I guess it's something similar in Thai, where they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So again, we can really convey a lot of information with graphical things, and increasingly we see graphical abstracts being used. Many journals now will allow you to have a graphical abstract, which is a sort of almost like a sort of take home one PowerPoint slide of what your article is contributing to. Again, a really nice way to structure your work. Results are really describing and explaining what you found. We're not going into the discussion here. One of the pitfalls that I often see certainly in people who I work with, but also articles which I receive to review, is there's often a mix of discussions and results. We often find some discussion of results in the results section, and results presented again in the discussion section. Again, this idea of a very structured approach, I think, is again useful to have up here as a sort of headline reminder that we don't discuss the results in the results, and we don't present the results in the discussion. So these sections are there for a reason. And it just allows us to really provide that structure to our work. So then we come to our discussion, what those implications are, how those ripples of information spread out. And as I just mentioned, don't add more results. That's one of the things that you should be very wary about. This is where, you remember in the introduction, you were providing that context, you were providing that theoretical underpinning, you were providing that positionality, you were providing that knowledge that had led you to produce the work. Within the discussion, you're reconnecting to those points that you made in the introduction. Okay. So again, it fits together as a single whole. So often in the introduction, you may have raised 4 or 5 key areas where you're contributing. You've then shown your results, you've described your results, you've presented them in really engaging ways in your results section. Within the discussion, you'll probably have, again, 3 or 4 paragraphs where you'll go back and you'll connect to those points that you raised. Yeah, so you're comparing with the previous work, you're providing that positionality, you're showing that new knowledge that you've created. But also, don't oversell your work. I mean, reviewers that will see your work will know the work that's out there. They will know what the contribution is. Be honest about limitations, be honest about error bars, be honest about, things that you could have done better, and be honest about, it was raining on the day that all of the people were coming, so they couldn't get there, or any, there was, an event happening, so we lost this segment of society or whatever. Just be honest about the challenges that you've experienced, and that feeds into that sort of suggestion of areas for future work. Thinking about the debates that you're informing, does it resonate with other people's work? Is it different? If so, why do you think it's different? What's next? Most And this is the reason partly why why there's this growing amount of work, because all research that's published invariably will then lead to more work, you know, to maintain that knowledge at the crest of the wave, because once it's published, it's then part of the wave. And then you've got new information that then, so you've got new directions which happen. And that's often, I find, one of the hardest parts, because if it was obvious that it was next, then you would have done it. You know, so again, thinking about those next steps, and that might be, you know, adding in additional sites. It might be bringing in different segments of society. It might be wanting to increase the resolution. You might have had a lot of change in one part of your analysis. You might want to zoom into that particular area to further constrain the understanding.
Excuse me, Professor Rob.
Mm.
So, does it mean that the recommendation should be a part of discussion?
Yes, yes. So it feeds into the discussion, but again, I often reiterate it in the conclusion. So it's part of the discussion, and the conclusion, I always find, it's not presenting new information. You're just summarizing, you know, the main and salient points. So comes into the discussion, and then it's reiterated in your conclusion. So again, you know, you're telling the story, but you're telling the story and you're hammering home the important parts of the story that you want to convey. And these bits of what next, that often feeds into our grant proposals and thinking out where we get our funding from. You know, and so, and when I look back, you can think of, well, what I've done within that paper is I said, what we really need to do is this. And then, you know, a year later, we apply for some funding to go and do what you said we needed to go and do. So in a way, you're creating your own opportunities as well. So there's quite a nice sort of trick there to do. So yeah, the conclusion is it's really summarizing those key take-home messages. As I say, for me, it's the bit I would go to after the abstract. You know, I skip over a lot of the, you know. So that's again a really important part. Tie back to your objectives. If I say, if you set up 3 aims or 3 hypotheses that you wanted to test in your paper, you know, provide ticks against all of those 3 aims. Tie back to your objectives, your introduction. I say 3 is often a sort of magical number. You know, this idea of you know, 3 points or sort of corners of a triangle, the rule of 3, stability, you know, rule of thirds in arts and music. 3 is often a really, it sort of resonates with sort of knowledge and our ability to capture information. Again, short. I mean, probably, I say 6,000 words. You've probably got 1.5 or 2,000 words in your introduction. Similarly, in your conclusion. Methods probably 1,000 words. So you've only got 1,000 words for your results and your conclusion. So often a conclusion, probably 2 paragraphs, sometimes just a paragraph. And ultimately, I always like to try and finish, you know, that last sentence, that take-home sentence, really important. You know, that last thing that you leave your reader with, that leaves them wanting more, is an important, really important thing to try and focus on. And that again can often then feed into potential future work, stuff your PhD students can then go and do, something that your own students, when you start to supervise students, can go and do. So again, just think about that main sort of take home message that you want to get. Okay, so we've got a paper, we've got a manuscript, we've gone through the different sections, we've got our big finish, everything's nicely formatted. Again, there's really clear instructions on all of the journals about instructions to authors, the formatting, the referencing. Get that feedback as you go. Share copies of your manuscripts with your supervisory teams, with other colleagues, with your peers, set up reading groups and all these types of things. Just find ways wherever possible to get feedback. Again, don't feel as though you're on your own in this, unless that's particularly how you want to work. If you really are that lone wolf that just likes to be left alone, don't bother. I'll finish it. I want to finish it, and then pass it across. But as I say to many people that I work with, be very careful, because or at least be expectant that you'll change. Because often I will find students will spend a lot of time, they won't want to share their work. They wait until they think it's perfect, and then they share it. And then it comes back with all sorts of challenges and changes. Yeah, I can see a few smiles around the room, so it's probably resonated with them. And because you do, and I've been on the receiving end of that, where you've written essays or you've done some assignment, you think it's brilliant, you send it in, and then it comes back with crossings out, and redo this, think about this, why have you drawn it like that? This needs labeling, this needs redoing, this is in the wrong format. So all of those things. So I say it's absolutely fine not to share stuff as you go along, if that's how you want to work. But be prepared that when you do share it, you may be in for a shock. As I have been shocked myself, and as I'm sure I've shocked others. But that's the process, and exactly the same with reviewers. When we submit articles to journals, obviously, hopefully it'll land on an editor's desk. She or he will look at it and think, oh, fantastic, that's really interesting, really attention, there's a really good contribution here, it'd be a great fit for the journal, hopefully this can go through. They will then send it to reviewers, depends on the journal, normally 3 reviewers. Is quite a common number, sometimes more, sometimes less. And they will come back with their review reports, hopefully not after too long, say within, say a month or 2. And it's often surprising, both as somebody who's handled papers coming in, as people who've submitted stuff, and then you've got review reports back, how often varied people's perspectives of the same work are. So in fact, we had a paper led by one of our Kenyan former PhD students, sent to the Journal of Biogeography, a good journal, came back 3 reviewers. 2 reviewers loved it, said yes, well, we have lots of little things to change and to revisit, and 1 reviewer said it should be rejected, it shouldn't, and that is quite common, that you get very, very different perspectives on your work. But the key thing with review and reviewer comments is to view them as perspectives. They're not truth. They're their particular understanding of your work. Sometimes I know I've certainly sent stuff to reviewers and they've not read it properly or they've not understood it properly. So you have a chance then to respond to your reviewers. You don't have to do everything they say. In fact, sometimes it's impossible to do what they say because they may be contradictory. You know, reviewer 1 might say do this, reviewer 3 says well, this shouldn't be done. You're left thinking, well, I can't. It's impossible to do what reviewer wants and what reviewer 3 wants. And again, we've had lots of examples of that. So certainly view them as people's perspectives. Also, don't view them as personal. It's not an attack on you. It's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on their understanding of your work as you've presented it. So I say, yes, it's feedback on your paper, not on you. And your opinion is very important. You know, ultimately, you are the expert in that field. You're the one that knows your work better than anyone else. You know, you've done it. You've spent years doing the analysis, working in the field, reading all of the work around it. You know, so your opinion is really important. So often when you're responding to reviewers, don't feel as though you have to just do everything that they ask for. If you feel you want to push back, if you feel you don't agree with a comment, say that. And the editor will have that ability to say, yes, I can see where they're coming from. I agree with them. Or sometimes it's not a case of agree or disagree. It's a matter of opinion. But your opinion is as important or more important than the reviewers. Okay. And I say ultimately, you know, I think academia is very much around perseverance, about not giving up, about being able to take rejection. And I think rejection probably is the wrong word. It's just a difference of opinion, you know. And I say this, depending on how you work, I think a graphical abstract, I think planning a paper out with a sort of, you know, an A3 sort of whiteboard or whatever can be really useful. I mean, I have a colleague in my work who, and that, you know, he works much better visually. So he will always plan his manuscripts out. He will always draw what he's thinking about on a whiteboard and then use that to plan a manuscript. We talked a little bit about the tools which are available, increasingly things like sort of ChatGPT. You know, it's just a tool, you know, and view it as a tool which can help you write. You know, often, you know, invariably now we often would use Google Docs to write something. You know, the predictive text is there. That's an AI. That's an AI working in the background, producing that text. You can switch it off if it's annoying you, and quite often those are the cases where it's predicting wrongly. You just take it off. And particularly for those of you that, you know, and most of you in the room, you know, English isn't your first language. You know, many journals are published in English. You know, use these tools to help with the English writing, with the sentence structure. Use things like this sort of find and replace. I mean, one thing I find really useful is the read aloud function in Word. just so rather than just looking at the screen, and because you've written it and you think, oh yeah, this section's fine, you tend to speed things, you tend to sort of gloss over the text on the screen. But when you hear it, it's very clear when there's a word out of place, or there's a sentence that doesn't quite make sense. Don't just rely on the computer. Again, friends, don't feel as though you're alone. In the same way, give your manuscripts to your peers. If you don't want to give it to your supervisors, give it to other people doing similar work to yourself. In the same way that, and you'll have to read theirs, and they can read yours. So again, and take that in feedback in an informal, in a friendly way. And it allows you to get feedback. It allows you to get different perspectives on your work. And luck, yes, there is a lot of luck involved in this. I mean, there is a peer review process. It's supposed to be rigorous, but certainly sometimes we've had articles that have gone through maybe easier than they could have, or invariably often we can sometimes find mistakes after things are being published that should have been picked up in the review process, in the editorial process. Sometimes we can have our academic nemesis out there, the people who often will review our papers, and they will always have a particular point. It may be different to yours. But again, this is where the opinion really matters. But there is a process of luck when it comes to publishing and when it comes to the review process. And this is, again, very clearly demonstrated, and it probably happens in, I would say, about 30% of papers that we've submitted, where we'll have very, very contrasting reviews. I don't know if I know you've published a lot, Pun, where you do get lots of different reviews. Sometimes they just love it. You say yes, 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 and then one just says, "Oh, this is terrible work, and it's fatally flawed, and and needs to be redone," and so there is a luck process when it comes to reviewers, and I say, particularly in those harder to publish in journals, where rejection is common, have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, so that when it comes back, you can get straight back on the horse, as it were, and then think about your next opportunity, where you want to try next. And ultimately that will allow you to succeed and ultimately get to wherever you want to get to, be it within an academic career, be it within a sort of policy NGO career, or a career outside of academia. And I think that's where I can finish. And it is, it's a process. As I mentioned right at the beginning, it's a process. It's a process which I think is interesting. Each article I've written has given, a different experience in terms of how easy it's been. I mean, some articles just come together so beautifully, and they're just a dream to put together because the results are fantastic, and it's all, but most of the articles are messy. Most of the often have dates which are upside down, or changes that don't sort of aren't in line with what you would expect. So again, work with what you have, and ultimately, we're all working in our own individual projects, very diverse, from seagrasses to soils to carbon to societal perspectives. But there's lots of contributions, there's lots of knowledge being created. And it's important to get that knowledge out there. I think just to finalize, one thing that I would emphasize is when that knowledge does get out there, when you do get the acceptance, when you do publish your paper, look at other ways to disseminate the work. Look at other ways to make sure that people know that it's there. And some of that is just sending around an email to people that you want to read your article, including the PDF. Some of it is around working with a communication department on writing a policy brief. Sometimes, that if it's policy relevant, sometimes that can go through the press office, and there'll be a press release around that. In fact, I this morning was working with our press department around a press release for our sort of nature climate change paper. That's now, well, I don't know, actually, I think maybe by tomorrow anyway. So it's also working with this center in Spain. So we're publishing that press release in English, Spanish, and French. So again, to connect to, say, Francophone countries. So again, just thinking about disseminating as much as you can. Also, other ways of talking about your work, making it publicly available through whatever form. We invariably do it through the journal, but we also have our own institution repositories, and getting it into those. Some Madrid newsletter, and getting it into those, creating posters, presenting at conferences. All of those ways are there for you to maximize your work. And ultimately, as you're going through your PhD careers, sending it to potential employers. People think, oh, and then so, 2 years' time, when you're thinking about going back to your country and getting a job at a institution, oh yes, I remember, she sent me that article 2 years ago or whatever. Oh, it's nice to see that they've now finished their work, and it just allows you to think about that wider impact of your work. As I mentioned earlier on, academic output is one of our currencies. It's one of the the ways that we generate wealth for ourselves as academics, and use that wisely. And on that, I shall finish, and happy to take any questions, any points for clarity. Say the slides, Pan will have that, and you can disseminate as you like.
Any questions from Prof or online? I may share my experience. The first article that I wrote for my PhD, I got rejected, and I was very sad for 1 week. I never have the experience for the publication, but the comments is really constructive, and I can use these comments to develop a second channel of my publication, and another, and also my thesis writing as well. So don't be sad with your disappointed. The first disappointing is the process. Yeah. And I agree that the hardest part is the discussion. Yeah. So keep on it as well. Any questions, any suggestion? Maybe we give, okay.
Actually, just you mentioned about the rejection experience. I also experienced that before when I did my master thesis. Actually, the master thesis was completely rejected by 2 professors when the paper was sent out for the review. But luckily, I got the support from my supervisor because that topic is on climate change litigation, which not happening in China yet. So most of the scholars have no idea about what this type of climate litigation is. Then the paper rejected, and my supervisor insists the paper should be resent out to another university to get other professor to review the whole process. And then after that review, it get a very good mark, and I got the opportunity to graduate from there. Thank you so much for this well-structured introduction of writing. Even writing is not easy at all, but through the whole process, we find there's a path we can follow. And the beauty of this presentation is it not only take care of the technical side of writing, but also in the last part to take care of the psychological part of the authors, which makes us to know that we can fight for that. And another one question, maybe not related to this introduction, I want to ask you because you're from another university, from another culture. And Mahidol University have brought a program with Australian universities. And as a PhD, if we apply for pursue this opportunity to study outside in another country, what can we obtain? I mean, academically, or is only cultural stuff, or guidance from other professor, or what?
Yeah, so well, I think that's a really good segue to my next meeting, which is around international relationships, and I think it's really important that different perspective, exposure to different cultures, exposure to different ways of working. So no, I would certainly, as somebody who individually has benefited a lot from exposure to different cultures and international relationships, I would grasp those wherever you can, both as students and as you go into your career. I'm sure there's lots to be said for those types of relationships.
So thank you so much, Rob, for sharing your secret recipe for the writing publication. But, yeah.